It was the dawn of the third age of podcasting, 30 years after the series had launched.
The Babylon podcast was a dream given form. Its goal, to discuss the place where humans and aliens could work out their differences peacefully.
It's a port of call, home away from home for established fans, newbies, Jon, Blaine, and guests.
Humans and aliens wrapped in 2,500,000 tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night.
It could be a dangerous place.
Wait, what?
But it's our last, best hope for peace.
This is the story of the last of the Babylon stations.
The year is 2024.
The name of the podcast is
Babylon 5, 30 years later. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Babylon 5, 30 years later. The podcast where John Wilson and myself go through every episode of Babylon 5, plus the TV movies, the Crusade spin-off, and as much of the ancillary material as we can get our hands on, generally aiming for 30 years after the date of release. How are you doing, John?
Doing all right. Making it along. I would recommend, though, that if you are looking for an idea for our next podcast, that you definitely don't want to go looking for ideas downtown, because it's pretty rough down there.
Yeah, there's also, 47 bulkheads to carve through?
Yes. But it made of lead, too, which, I don't know. It's hard to see through that stuff, I've been told.
Yes, and for once, that's not the Superman reference.
It's a double entendre.
Yes, but no, we are talking about Hunter Prey, which first aired on March 1st, 1995. Written by Jim Straczynski, as all but 3 of the rest of the series were. And it was directed by Menachem Benetsky. This is Menachem's first Babylon 5 episode of 2. This person has 7 director credits. There are 2 from 1970. And then directed 3 episodes of LA Law, 3 of Knots Landing, 2 of Class of 96, and went on to direct 3 episodes of the Perfume Rapist miniseries in 1998. And that is this person's entire IMDb listing. So I was kind of expecting to see more, because I was mostly happy with the direction here.
I'm going to go with Menachem, probably, for the first name.
Okay, and I will always defer to you for different linguistic name pronunciations, so okay.
But yeah, that's quite the eclectic collection of directing tasks there.
Yeah, I don't know. There's only one moment where something didn't really come across, which I only found out by reading JMS's notes. But he is blaming the writer because 2 things were happening at the same time in 2 different directions on screen. So the more important one came across.
Okay.
But as far as this episode is concerned, normally go through the A plot, the B plot. We really have, for the most part, we don't really have a B plot. If you go by screen time, we've got kind of like an A plot and an H plot. What we do have are 2 different perspectives on the A plot. So there's 2 different groups looking at the same story from 2 very different angles. And then that minor plot line, that H plot, is about Sheridan and Kosh trying to understand each other better, which essentially amounts to starting with Sheridan. In the pre-credits teaser, Sheridan and Ivanova are in Bay 13 looking at Kosh's spaceship, which gets cranky with them and basically convinces them to back off. And we find out that nobody likes going into Bay 13 and they just kind of leave the ship alone. And then Garibaldi comes to give them a little bit of a briefing on what's coming. So, really, Earth Force is coming to find a missing doctor who apparently has abused his security clearance to get access to high-level information, and very high because he was the president's personal physician, and now they are on the run. And, so Sheridan and Garibaldi, the rest of the command staff, the story sounds reasonable enough, so they agree to go along with it, devote the station security to it, and it's only after they've made that decision, When Sheridan and Garibaldi are walking down a hallway, Sheridan sees a little red ribbon tied around something, which is a signal for those, from the General Haig and those who are working with him, that someone wants to meet. That is the point with direction. That cutaway has to be there, but that also is, it kind of distracts the viewer and the camera. The reason Garibaldi didn't notice what was going on there is because he was distracted because the person walking past them on the other side was a ranger. And they were meant to exchange a look, but the cutaway had to happen while that look happened.
Mm.
Anyway, so Sheridan makes his excuses and then meets with this person. They find out that, oh no, this guy didn't steal sensitive files. He has the sensitive files from being the doctor who did the medical checkup on President Clark, or then Vice President Clark, before the ship blew up, or Earth Force One blew up in the first season finale. And he was not sick, as he claimed, which supports the idea that he knew Earth Force One was going to be destroyed and he wanted to get off. And it looks like he was involved in a plot to assassinate President Santiago so he could take over.
It certainly is a very convenient illness to just suddenly not be there when the president gets assassinated.
Yeah. So that everyone was suspicious, but now this seems to be the documented proof because this doctor checked him out before and after and found nothing wrong with him. No sign of any virus. So this is why they need to get this doctor's data crystal safely off the station and into other hands for when they make the move against President Clark. So at this point, the command staff have to be working against their own security people to try and get this to happen. And what makes it worse is that the doctor has been tagged with a radioactive isotope that makes him detectable by scanners as long as you're at fairly close range. So Garibaldi and Franklin go undercover to try and track it down. The doctor doesn't really know how to travel that discreetly, so he draws a little too much attention from the wrong people and ends up getting kidnapped. And the kidnappers are trying to sell the doctor and his data crystal. But Garibaldi and Franklin manage to track him down because Franklin recognizes his pocket watch. And then, they get him free, get the data crystal back, and eventually get him off the station with the help of Kosh, who hides the doctor in his ship long enough for them to scan and not find the doctor on board. So that Sheridan says, okay, you're done here. Stop disrupting our station. We will give you all the information about every ship that had left between when you think he was here and now, so you can, or when you showed up on the station, so you could try and track his flight path and figure out where he went next. So they do pull it off successfully. And I think those are the main points. Before we get into the cast, did I miss anything in the story?
No, I think that's basically it. I can't remember if you summed up the end of the conversation between Kosh and Sheridan, that basically they have a lot of learning to do about each other, but it's a kind of exploration that Sheridan really doesn't understand what it's going to entail because Kosh is being super obtuse about it.
Yes. All Kosh says is he needs to be prepared to fight legends.
And I'm assuming this is not the DC Legends of Tomorrow legends.
No, but that is a line of dialogue that was going to show up when we talk about giving form to the dream. All right, so the guest cast, I found 3 very recognizable people here. One is Bernie Casey. So Casey plays Derek Cranston. So he is the Earth Force officer who's leading the search that comes to the station. I immediately know him as Mr. Ryan from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Yes, he's the principal in that.
Yeah. Yeah, the vice principal and their social studies teacher. And people might also know him for, he's got a recurring role in the Revenge of the Nerds franchise.
I think he's a principal kind of role in that too.
Could be, yeah. He's UN Jefferson. So, including TV movie versions of Revenge of the Nerds sequels, which tell me that they've probably changed dramatically from the theatrical releases.
Well, only the first Revenge of the Nerds was as extreme most of them were just playing into the same kind of comedy. The first one gets exploitative in some ways we're not going to go into now.
Yeah.
The other ones didn't quite go that far with it.
Okay. But yeah, we will say the first did not age well.
Yeah.
And was probably problematic for a huge chunk of the audience when it came out.
Yeah, I'd say about at least probably half the audience at least.
Yep. Or at least half the population. I don't know how many of them looked at the ads and said, I'm not going.
Right.
He also showed up in 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine. So it's the 2-part from season 2, the Maquis parts 1 and 2. He was Commander Calvin Hudson.
His performance in that is not amazing. It's a decent 2-parter, but Bernie Casey is pretty off in that. He and Sisko are supposed to be like longtime great friends, and it just something doesn't click with that. But that's okay because this is a Deep Space Nine podcast. I was noticing because I haven't seen it yet, but he was Felix Leiter in Never Say Never Again, one of the many Felix Leiters from the James Bond franchise.
Okay, I haven't actually seen that one yet either, and I'm too behind on the Daniel Craig films. And he also showed up in 1 episode of Sequest 2032. And then he went on to do, this is actually his first of 2 appearances as Derek Cranston in Babylon 5. He was also Tyrus Block, the voice of Tyrus Block in Batman Beyond. Yeah, he had a decent amount of work until his last credited work is 2007, and he passed away in 2017 at age 78.
Okay.
Now, we also have Wanda de Jesus, I'm assuming is the way that's the preferred pronunciation. So this was Sarah. She was the contact for General Haig, who was talking to Sheridan.
So she's in 2 scenes, but they're key scenes because they basically give us the real reason why this episode exists.
Yeah.
Because Casey's character, Cranston, is, we got to catch him because he knows stuff, Black Ops things, secret stuff. So, we got to catch him.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't know if Casey's character knows the truth or if he believes a lie he's been told. Right. So he's definitely working for Clark, but whether or not he knows that, his marching orders are a load of crap, I don't know.
Because it definitely seems like a need-to-know kind of thing, and you don't need to know just to catch the guy.
Yeah. So, it's also, the truth is not the kind of thing you'd want to spread around and have well known anyway. Anyway, so Wanda de Jesus is known for Bloodwork, RoboCop 2, Ghosts of Mars, and The Insider. She's appearing in, at least latest at the time of this recording, Fatal Attraction miniseries. She's done 9 episodes of All My Children, 5 of Sons of Anarchy, 10 of CSI Miami. So I'm going through her IMDb listings here. I'm seeing Profiler, Diagnosis, Murder. She was Dr. Sylvia Lopez in 1 episode of the Spider-Man animated series from the 90s. She's also in 1 episode of Sequest 2032.
I probably saw her in RoboCop 2 when I saw RoboCop 2 that one time. She was also in the first RoboCop, but she's not credited. So I don't know if her character just wasn't as significant in that film. It's the same named character, Estevez.
Yeah, so she seems like she's been steadily working, but hasn't really had those breakout roles.
Right. I liked seeing her in this, so seeing that she's only going to have this one appearance is mildly disheartening. When you have like a point of contact like this, it doesn't need to be the same person every time. In fact, it adds some verisimilitude if it's not the same person every time. But having 1 or 2 of those faces, show up multiple times, it helps you feel connected to it.
All right, our next guest star is Tony Steedman. So he's the one playing Dr. Everett Jacobs here. I would say he is best known for playing Socrates in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And I did check with the script book. it is a pure coincidence that Garibaldi uses the word bogus. That was scripted before either of these roles were cast.
Okay.
But unfortunately, Stephen passed away in 2001. He would have been 74. But yeah, this is his one episode on Babylon 5. He was also a head waiter in Scrooged. He was working up until 1998. He was the voice of Justin Hammer in 11 episodes of the Iron Man animated series from the 90s.
Okay. I haven't seen any of that. A lot of my 90s Marvel animated is one of those things that I would like to get to someday, probably whenever I'm reading more 90s Marvel, so I can kind of, have them side by side my experience. But my 90s Marvel won't be happening anytime soon.
No, and I have that entire series. I've watched so far just the pilot. It was not the kind of thing that made me say, ooh, I can't wait to see more.
So you have not seen more yet.
He's also in one episode of Doogie Howser, MD, credited as Father, so probably not a huge role if he doesn't even get a name. 15 episodes of Days of Our Lives. And before this, there was obviously Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, an episode of Golden Girls, an episode of The New Gidget, an episode of Beauty and the Beast with Perlman and Hamilton. He was a judge on The Facts of Life. He was in My Two Dads, The Return of Sherlock Holmes TV movie as a doctor. I know I have seen that, but it came out when I was 9 or 10, depending on what day of that year it was broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
So, scrolling through these, he was in a 1978 version of The 39 Steps, so a remake or another adaptation of the same novel that inspired an Alfred Hitchcock movie. And he was Lord Farningham in another Sherlock Holmes production in 1965. So his IMDb credits go back to 1956 when he was 29 years old. And now, I would say our last guest star that we want to talk about is probably our best known guest star. So, Richard Mull is probably best known for playing Bull Shannon on Night Court.
Which is great and fantastic, and I liked Night Court, but this is not where I think of him as being from.
Okay.
Because I grew up watching House multiple times because it's a movie we had on tape. And you know how it is in the 80s. The movies you have on tape, you've seen 50 times if you've seen them once.
Mm-hmm.
And House is a mid-80s... it's technically horror, but it's more like mildly creepy and a little bit silly. But I find it eminently charming. And it stars William Catt, who was, of course, the Greatest American Hero a few years earlier. And Mole plays his old Vietnam buddy who they're in an encounter and he gets shot, and Catt's character goes off to get help. And while he's going off to get help, enemy soldiers come and get Mole's character. And so he's being dragged off, for probably bad treatments. And he's like, I'm going to get you for this. You should have... Because he's basically, don't go off and get help. Kill me. Don't let them get me. So it ends up at the end, you find out that Mole's character is the one haunting the house the whole time. But anyways, it's a fun little film, and I really like it. And he plays Big Ben in that. But also Night Court. Yeah, we can go with Night Court.
Yep. And he's done a lot of voice work in superhero stuff. So back to the 90s Spider-Man, he was the Scorpion and Mac Gargan. We're obviously the same character. He was Two-Face in two different incarnations of Batman. There's the 90s Batman and Batman the Brave and the Bold.
Seems appropriate that he'd be Two-Face in two different versions.
Yep. He was in Evolution. He was in But I'm a Cheerleader. So he's had a lot of work. He was even the Abomination in the 90s Incredible Hulk cartoon. So which I could see he's got that deep voice.
Mm-hmm.
That could work really well. He was Emperor Spooge in Superman the Animated Series. So He was Frankenstein's monster in an episode of the TV adaptation for Weird Science. And he was in an episode of Due South, which I remember quite fondly. And it holds up fairly well. I've got the series on DVD. I don't know if you are that familiar with...
I've never heard of Due South.
Okay, Due South was a series that started as a joint production between the CTV network in Canada and CBS in the United States. And it is essentially a satire of the American perception of Canadians. A member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The way he often describes it when people ask why he's there, it's Constable Benton Fraser, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I first came to Chicago on the trail of the killers of my father, and for reasons that don't need exploring at this juncture, remained attached as liaison to the Canadian consulate. That's kind of the premise. And they even spoof that to the point, like, when he gets to season 4, someone goes, "Who is this guy?" And then, 4 people who know him do the speech, taking turns doing the lines.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, it's really good. So for the first... It was on for 4 seasons and was canceled 3 times.
Okay.
So it was canceled at the end of season 1, and then they moved it to a lesser time slot, so they thought, and then it found its audience there in that new time slot before the season ran out. So they quickly filmed another season finale, because the one that they had, they thought would be the series finale. So then they continued the story to say, oh, it didn't end the way you thought it did. And then it got canceled at the end of season 2, took a year off the air, and then was picked up as a CTV production alone, and got 2 more 13-episode seasons, which were eventually repackaged as a 3rd and final season for the US. It has one of the best series finales ever. It was one of the early dramedies, and for that series finale, when they got renewed in Canada and found out you're going to get 2 more 13-episode seasons, they were so happy and so excited. They're figuring, you know what, we're riding on a high. We know that these 2 years are the only 2 years we're going to get. Let's do the finale now while we're still feeling good so we can really make it funny. Because so many other comedic season finales, everyone is so depressed that it's ending, they're not that funny.
Right.
So it ends up being one of the best season finales ever. Occasionally guest stars Leslie Nielsen.
Occasionally?
Occasionally, yes. He was kind of a mentor to the lead and a friend of his father's.
Gotcha.
So he pops up once in a while. Highly recommended. So, we may talk about Due South again in a few years, perhaps, if you've never seen it. Because it is well worth watching.
All right.
But, yeah, going back through Richard Moll's filmography, he did a lot of shows before this. Metal Storm, The Destruction of Jared Sin, that might be the role that got him the job on Night Court.
Okay.
Because the timing lines up. Night Court premiered in 1984. Metal Storm came out in 1983. And he got the job on Night Court because he played a desert monster in some sci-fi or fantasy film, and had to shave his head for it. And he walked into the audition with a shaved head, and they said, "That's the look, you're the guy," and cast him just for his look.
Wow. He was in an episode of Smallville that I saw recently, because I've been rewatching Smallville alongside the Talkville podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Talkville is Tom Welling and Michael Rosenbaum and a friend of theirs doing a rewatch of Smallville and talking about the episodes. And after the first couple seasons of Smallville, I have only seen Smallville once. So this is sort of my excuse to go back and rewatch it all. Which I was going to do anyway eventually whenever the Superman read-through got there. But now I don't have to wait until I get to 2001 with my Superman reading.
Okay.
I say have to like I don't have a choice in the matter. But you know how it is.
Yeah. There's the cases where you have a choice, but the way our psychology works, no, you don't have a choice.
Yeah, it's like, but do you really?
Yeah. All right, so Richard Moll has been working steadily since 1977. And I think that wraps up our major guest stars. Although it is worth noting that it was during the filming of this episode that Tech Corwin finally got a name.
Okay.
They were setting this up, and Claudia Christian was in JMS's office before he got there, willing to face him before coffee, which is definitely saying something. Harlan Ellison says he used to drive trucks loaded with dynamite, and he was a member of a gang, and nothing scared him as much as having to talk to JMS before his coffee. But she was there saying he needs a name. He said, fine, it's Corwin, naming him after Norman Corwin, who is a radio writing giant. He did a lot of radio. And so then, Claudia Christian was going, okay, and does he have a first name? And JMS said, no, it's a part-time role. He gets a part-time name. If it's a full-time role, he'll get a full-time name. and then booted her out of the office so he could get his coffee. But yes, so that's Lieutenant Corwin, played by Josh Cox, who, they just pressured Straczynski into giving him a name. I think we mentioned this before, but just to refresh it, he was just a fantastic guy to work with and hang out with. They loved having him on set. And if he had a name, and it's listed as Tech David Corwin, so I'm not sure at which point he gets the David. We'll have to see. That might be some of the ancillary material. But if he has a name, then the scripts would call him by name, and he's got that role. Prior to this, it was just, Tech number 1, Tech number 2, and whoever happened to be available at that time had the role. I think there's a woman with a mild Russian accent that showed up for a lot of season 1, but I don't recall seeing her in season 2 yet. It's largely been Josh Cox's Corwin for season 2. All right, so having gotten through all the guest cast, League in session. So our general discussion and thoughts of the episode, its strengths and weaknesses. So, what were your thoughts on this one, John?
So, I really liked sort of the raison d'etre of this episode, that we're returning to the notion of the presidential succession and the fact that, there were shenanigans involved there. I like that is something that they're not just letting sit. We've had ideas in this season about how we're trying to take back our government and, et cetera. And so having that play into another episode here was good. Also the stuff with Kosh, because we open up on Sheridan and Ivanova staring at a green screen and interacting with a room full of nothing. But, with the effects and everything, of course, we get the ship and all of that. And it's cool to get reminded that Kosh is a big old cipher. He's a mystery wrapped up in Enigma armor. And we don't really know anything about him. And I keep forgetting that. Sometimes I kind of forget that he's even there. But it's interesting because he is there, and the nature of the Vorlons is, seems pretty obvious. It's a mystery that's going to get unraveled or, as we go through the course of the series. It's just that sometimes I forget to think about as even being a mystery. So it's nice to have this reminder here in a way that engages Sheridan as a character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely another element. We don't see a lot of Kosh. When you say he's a big old mystery, he is big. If you pay attention, he never walks through doors on screen because the encounter suit doesn't actually fit through them. So he will approach a door, they'll cut away, and then they'll cut back, and he's on the other side. And meanwhile, they put that encounter suit on a trolley and hauled it around the set to bring it in the other side to get the other shot.
I just choose to believe that he doesn't actually go through the door. He just suddenly is on the other side.
Yeah.
But there's a lot in this episode that I really enjoyed. I don't know. We have different tones of episode with things being like really big stakes, and this doesn't feel really big stakes. It's not like, there's the fate of the galaxy online or a big war or anything, but the events here do play into the kinds of things that could have big ramifications later, as far as, the president being evil and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I looked at it. It entertains throughout, and it gives us a potentially important piece of that puzzle. Mm-hmm. Right? Because now they have some documentation that, yes, Clark was healthy on that day and did not actually need to leave the ship.
I think it's amusing that he even bothered to see his doctor. If he's gonna fake an illness, then why even bring the doctor in? Because he's not actually sick.
Yeah, I'm just gonna assume somebody else said, "Hey, the doctor's right here. Let's have him take a look at you," and he couldn't think of a viable excuse to say no.
Mm.
Right, the kind of thing he was pressured into rather than his idea.
Or maybe he expected the doctor to be more willing to play ball, and was kind of surprised that he wasn't.
Yeah, yeah. Who knows? But yeah, I enjoyed it too. The concept of this was, with the budget that they had, as we said, it was fairly low for TV science fiction. They couldn't afford to keep jumping back to Earth a lot. So the idea was to keep this plot thread going by having the key person from Earth come here. This was actually not one of JMS's favorite episodes. He says it's a run and jump. So his issues with it are not generally with the execution. Right? So the episode was well made, but he doesn't see a lot about it that's uniquely Babylon 5. If you take out the exact nature of the data this guy's got, he's got a MacGuffin, and there's 2 teams looking for him.
Mm-hmm. I can see that.
So he's right on that point, that it would take a minimal rewrite to put this script into a lot of other TV series.
And the fact that they don't go to Earth a lot is something I've been thinking about, because we're going to be talking about the first novel Voices here in a couple of episodes. And, the idea of going to Earth is part of the discussion of that story. And I was just thinking, we not only don't go to Earth much, we don't go to planets much in this show. And, with us growing up on Star Trek, and when we think space opera, you think visiting alien worlds. Not so much on this one.
No, but again, at this point, the budget was still below $800,000 per episode. It tops out at $880,000 per episode. Now, compare that to other science fiction franchises of the time, on American television at least. It probably had a higher budget than Doctor Who did when it went off the air with Sylvester McCoy.
Yeah, but I had a higher budget than Doctor Who did.
That's true. Yeah, that's why I'm doing the caveat for the American television, because BBC had a showrunner or a president from the early 80s into the 90s who did not like science fiction and felt BBC was the wrong place for it. So he kept eroding the budget on Doctor Who to try and get the viewership down so he could justify cancelling it. And he did it once in the middle of the Colin Baker era, and the writing campaign caused them to bring him back, but they brought it back without Colin Baker's doing a regeneration scene. They had Sylvester McCoy face down in a wig. Anyway, this is not a Doctor Who podcast, although we could probably do one if we felt like it. Yeah, so this, as JMS points out, it's a MacGuffin. And once you have the MacGuffin, it goes through. I think it does the job well.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and as you said, it is nice to see that piece of the investigation against Clark continuing. So there's a lot of things building towards it. Really, the only thing I would say that didn't work out that well is just the CGI on Kasha's ship has not aged well.
Okay, yeah, I thought about that too. Yeah, it's so... The effects in this are always very notably 90s, and it's mostly a texture thing, because the animations are done well, but the just the actual lighting and such of the ships and everything is at a stage that, compared to today, is very unrefined. But that becomes very evident in the interactions with the ship, because the ship is very obviously a giant green crayon blob. Not crayon really, but because it's computer. But it's very obviously not real. There's nothing there.
Yeah, I think a lot of the difference between that is the difference between rendering and ray tracing. So with rendering, you generate an image and then you kind of just shade it with approximations. With ray tracing, you set the surface textures and the physical properties so how they reflect light, what colors are reflected, and what proportions. You pick a camera perspective and then you trace back light rays as they bounce off objects until you go back to a light source to calculate what it would look like. That gives you a at the time, especially with the computing power available, especially since they were doing this with Commodore Amigas with the video toaster added on, ray tracing gives you a much more realistic image, but there's absolutely no way that they could have ray traced this season and gotten it finished on time.
Mm-hmm.
I did a ray tracing of a part of the exterior of my high school for a class project in 1995 with a IBM 486 66 megahertz, which was pretty top of the line at that time. And I had to start the ray tracing on the Friday before a long weekend and came back on Tuesday, and it was almost done for one image that was essentially 6 rectangles with surface textures. So some of the Babylon 5 images, they would take like a day to render one image, but those are the frames where there's stuff going on in the background and they're breaking the record for the highest number of spaceships on screen. They did the best they could with the resources that were available, but there is no question that it's a product of its time.
Yeah. So, the fact that the ship is organic technology is something that has been mentioned before on the show as a possibility. We get it confirmed here. And it's kind of cool. Organic technology is one of those things that, like, we didn't really have any idea in 1994 what that would look like. I think a lot of productions and films have done stuff with wet works and everything that makes organic technology look a lot grosser than it is now, than it was here. But there are different ways. There are different ways you can take it because organic technology is still pretty largely fictional. So how you want it to look is probably just up to the mind of the creator.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm assuming that's probably going to play into things. The fact that it has organic technology. Maybe it's just the fact that it's different. And so it can be like magically different and do stuff that our technology can't. Or maybe the fact that it's organic is going to be important in and of itself. I don't know yet because we haven't gotten there.
No, let's come back to that in a couple of sections.
I thought that even though this is largely a, I don't know, detective piece isn't the right word. It's a search for MacGuffin. And so the people who would search for things like Garibaldi, he's one of the major players in this. Franklin helps him do things. So, like, Ivanova is not a major player, but she still gets some really great moments. I really liked the moment where she was telling the guy, someone should have told you at a very young age that you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. Because Cranston is just being needlessly coarse the entire time. And it's just, there's just no call for it. There's no reason to steamroll all over everybody on the station just to get something done. And I like that she puts him in his place on that one because that's a very Ivanova thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she doesn't take a lot of crap. And this is especially after he's saying, well, why didn't you tell me you could tie in the sensors to search for these radioisotopes? And she's like, oh, yeah, you didn't ask.
Yeah.
And it's an extensive procedure. It's going to take time, so they're still stalling. This is after they'd sent him through downtown, which that's what we were riffing on at the start of this podcast, where they had to carve through 47 bulkheads.
Mm-hmm.
And the 47 here is also a coincidence. At the time, Straczynski was not watching Star Trek The Next Generation. He was trying to not be influenced by anything else. He didn't have time for it because he was busy. He has since come back and rewatched it. But at the time, yeah, he was not watching Star Trek and didn't after Babylon 5 came to him during that writer's strike early in the Next Gen era, which also affected Jake and the Fat Man Season 2, which, we'll be talking about Jake and the Fat Man later because JMS did write for that. But the fact that there's 47 bulkheads, that 47 was a randomly selected number for that. I just point that out because Star Trek fans have wondered if it was a deliberate reference. It was not. Star Trek, Next Generation, and Voyager in particular use the number 47 a lot as a ref. It became sort of an in-joke because the original pilot when Star Trek first hit the air, it had a 47 share, meaning 47% of the TVs that were turned on at that point in time were watching Star Trek.
Gotcha. I never noticed the recurring use of 47 on Star Trek. Now I'm going to be listening for it all the time. This is coming out during the second half of the first Star Trek season that doesn't have the Next Generation in it. So I'm assuming he did a lot of the writing for this season while the last season, Next Generation, was still on the air. But I don't know if it's possible to know exactly how the timing on all that works out.
It would take more time to look up than I have here, but yes, the chronologies are there. We can see the timelines. So during that writer's strike, which I think for Star Trek was the end of season 3, was it maybe?
The writer's strike was several years earlier, end of season 2.
Okay, yeah, so during that writer's strike, he came with the idea of Babylon 5, and it took him 5 years to get it on the air.
Okay. I think I liked that Garibaldi got to shine in this. This is kind of his episode. I liked the different aspects of Sheridan's personality we see in this, because Sheridan is still a character that I'm still getting a feel for just all of who he can be, like what kind of a person he is. And it goes back and forth from brusque to kindly very quickly, almost mercurially. And even whenever he's like getting onto somebody, there's sometimes a bit of a half smile on the corner of his mouth. So he's an interesting person to watch as far as how he emotes, not just as an actor, but as a character.
Mm-hmm.
But he gets very annoyed with Cranston in this, not just because of the fact that Cranston's looking for stuff that's, basically going to clear the vice president of illegal wrongdoing, but also he's tearing up the station to do so. And so we're getting violated on a number of levels here, and he kind of gets really mad at Cranston at the end. But it's also funny because he's in the middle of pulling the wool over Cranston's eyes because they're totally faking getting this guy. They're getting this guy off the station and hiding it from him. So the whole getting mad is all a put on. And it's just it all plays very, very nicely. The end of this episode is my favorite part of the episode, I think. But I have a question for you.
Okay.
I really wish we had seen the conversation. How do you think they got Kosh to agree to go along with something as pedestrian as hiding a guy on your ship so that we can get him off the station? That's like the most normal thing that Kosh has done in the entire series so far. And we didn't even get to see him agree to it and be involved.
Yeah, that would have been a nice conversation to see. I am hesitant to speculate.
Because you know too much?
Yeah, I will just say that at this point, we will learn that Kosh knows a lot more about what's going on than the audience does at this point. So Kosh would have his own motivations for playing along in this particular incident.
Okay.
But again, it's a lot of speculations. It's never explicitly answered at any point in the series. But when the audience eventually knows what Kosh already knows and what JMS already knew Kosh knew, then we will be able to easily say, oh, he might have been doing this because.
Gotcha. One final note about Kosh is that somebody, I forget who, says the ship... Yeah, it was the doctor, says the ship sang to him.
Mm-hmm.
You've been reading the scripts, so I don't know if you've noticed this, but they say in the novel we're talking about in a couple of episodes that Kosh's voice is like musical notes, which I don't really get whenever the actual effect that we get when we hear him on the show. But if his actual voice is musical notes, the idea that the ship sang to his doctor just kind of, I don't know, made me wonder about connections and concept there and how the whole Vorlon thing is supposed to be working.
Yeah, well, remember the voice that we hear for Kosh? There's two voices there, so he's got that machine that lights up when he's speaking.
Mm-hmm.
It's the machine that's producing the English.
Right, yes.
So that little chiming we hear in the background, that's Kosh's actual voice. That's not the machine. The machine is only producing English.
I wouldn't describe that sort of electronic noise behind his voice as music. There are frequencies that I can't hear, so maybe there's more going on there than what I can hear. But I never thought I never thought that Kosh sounded musical.
Yeah, I think that the actual audio for Kosh's voice was produced with a musical instrument, but there's no real melody to it. So it doesn't trigger it as, oh, that's music. But I think they were just playing notes on a keyboard to make the sound. So that could be why it's in there. But as we get to the novel, we'll find that some of the descriptions there and some of the events just don't line up with the show at all.
Right. Which is what happens with tie-in fiction. We'll talk more about that in a couple weeks.
Yes.
But yeah, like you said, it's not a super Babylon 5e episode, but I still enjoyed it despite that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably all I got on it.
Yeah, this is one it's tough to dig into and really discuss because, as we've said, it's pretty straightforward. So it is a piece of the long-term puzzle, but it doesn't require a lot of deep interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that's easy to miss on the first viewing, I also missed on the second, which was actually my third viewing, which was Garibaldi making eye contact with the Ranger because I was more focused on Sheridan, as was the camera, because that's what the story needed. So when you're doing two different things at once, it didn't really serve the second one well.
Yeah, one of the things that I'll be doing whenever we're releasing these episodes and listening back to them is going back because, we subtly mentioned appearances of Rangers before we knew they were Rangers because you had mentioned that somebody was doing something and you wouldn't say what. And so I never caught any of that in the first viewing. So I'll be going back and looking for those elements. And I'll do that with this one too, because I don't remember what shot would have had a Ranger in it. So I'll have to go back and see what that is.
There was that one insert where we actually see the red ribbon tied to the grating. That was Sheridan's signal to meet the person.
Mm-hmm.
The look that Garibaldi and the Ranger exchanged would have been exchanged while the camera was pointed at the ribbon.
Okay.
So that should tell you exactly where to find it. So you kind of see the look before and the look after, but not the look during.
Gotcha.
So do we have any more comments here before we move on to our last best hope?
No, I think that's pretty good. Done it for me.
So, what was your standout character or character moment?
I had a hard time with this one because, like I said, there's not really a lead character for this episode. Garibaldi and Franklin do a lot of the actual moving of the plot, but everyone kind of gets stuff to do. I always love it when Ivanova mouths off to people because she is...
She's very good at that. That's why.
She is. She's really good at that. She just tells people exactly what they should have already thought of in the first place. And why are you misbehaving like this? Anyways. But I think I'm going to go with the ending of the episode whenever they totally fake out Cranston with the Vorlon ship. That was very cleverly done, executed as performances and as a bit of, plot gyrations. I thought it was pretty great. And probably most specifically within that is the end of it whenever Ivanova turns to the commander and the captain and says, "You enjoyed that." And he's like, "How dare you insinuate such a thing?" And she's like, mistaken thought. And he's like, "I guess I'll overlook it this time." And then he smiles at her because, yeah, he totally did enjoy telling Cranston off because Cranston could just go eat a bag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would agree. It was really hard to pick one this time. Because I found this episode is very consistent. So, the whole thing, aside from Costa's ship CGI, I thought it was good from start to finish, but there was no momentary spike to really great, which is usually how we pick that last best hope. It was... Mm-hmm. The quality was pretty uniform. So I ended up going with a slightly earlier moment in that same scene when Sheridan is working with Cranston there. Because Boxleitner plays it so perfectly. His facial expression, I looked closely. I even paused it the second time through. He's not actually smiling, but he's doing something with his facial muscles to make it clear to the audience that he's suppressing a smile, which is a really challenging thing to do, and he just does it. So, yeah, like Ivanova, he is enjoying it, although he can't officially admit it in front of all those witnesses. But yeah, he genuinely is enjoying it, but he's not actually smiling in front of Cranston. So if Cranston doesn't know something's up like the audience does, he's not going to find that smile on his face.
It makes me think of, you read Peter Pan for your Bedtime in the Public Domain stories, right?
I have actually been thinking about it. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I did read it about 20 years ago. Okay.
So it describes the mom as always having a kiss in the corner of her mouth, which is just, a charming little description of your mom. I feel like sometimes Sheridan has this smile hidden in the corner of his scowl. He's acting angry. He's stern, but there's also kind of this like smile just like tucked in there on the side. Like it's going to be okay at the end of it all. He's not actually super angry, but yeah.
Yeah. And he does it so, like, Boxleitner is so good at that. I've noticed that too. And he's consistently doing it in cases where Sheridan would be happy about what's going on, but as captain of the station, he has to berate whoever that person is for the choice they just made.
Right.
So it would be, kind of like when my sister and I were kids. I was in grade 5. She was grade 7. She wanted a phone in her room. And Mom said, your father and I are not installing a phone jack in your room. But she bought the phone anyway, and we took them literally. My parents went next door for about half an hour to visit the neighbors and left us home alone for that half an hour. And by the time they got home, my sister was talking on the phone in her room with the phone jack that she and I installed. And my mom was ready to punish her. And my dad looked at her and said, I didn't teach them how to do that. Mom realized, okay, Dad is too proud of the fact that his kids figured out how to install a phone that works. Because as soon as they left, my sister was getting the banana knife and carving the hole and mounting the bracket while I was down looking at the block of wires in the phone thing going, oh, okay, this is how they're connected. I can hook this up. So, yeah.
That's pretty great.
So it's kind of like that. It's that point where, the parent has to punish the child, but secretly they're kind of proud of what they just did. Like the Facebook reels with oh, my child beat the crap out of the school bully. Okay, yeah, I'll punish them when we get home. But on the way home, let's stop for ice cream.
Yep.
All right, so shall we move on to giving form to the dream?
Yes. So, obviously, the fact that the vice president faked his illness in order to gain to not be there when the other president was killed, which he then in turn did in order to gain the presidency, that is both past and future important. Is the fact that a ranger was present in this particular episode important, or are we just reinforcing the ranger's presence on the station?
Yeah, I believe it's just reinforcing their ongoing presence at this point.
Okay. So what else have you got?
So this is our confirmation that Vorlons are using organic technology, which is relevant because of the last time we had confirmation that a race was using the organic technology.
That was the
Infection.
The guy who turned into an armored bounty hunter?
Yeah, the episode that was referenced in the dialogue here when Garibaldi was saying, hey, last time you vouched for somebody, we had dead people and the Akaran warrior tearing up the station. It was that episode.
Okay.
So that was season 1, episode 4, Infection.
Wow.
Yeah. So a nice little callback just to remind you and connect those dots if you want to connect those dots.
So probably if you were to go back to that podcast episode and listen to the Giving Form to the Dream section on that, we'd probably emphasize the organic technology in that episode.
Not just that it was organic, but that it was kind of insect-like. Now, the second conversation we see between Sheridan and Kosh, where they're trying to understand each other and trying to figure out where they're going, and he says to fight legends. All of that is there, especially some of this where, you know, in the middle where Sheridan is getting very upset when Kosh says, okay, you don't understand, go away, and Kosh turns to leave. Sheridan says, what do you want? And Kosh responds by turning around and saying, never ask that question.
And if we recall, he was the one person who didn't get asked that question when, what's his name? It starts with an M.
Morden.
When Morden was on the station.
Mm-hmm.
There are two people in the novel who have similar names to that. And at first I thought it was him showing up in the novel, and it was not.
No. But we do have a character who only appeared once on screen showing up in the novel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think those are the main things. Obviously, that at this point, the big obvious one is the confirmation that Clark was not actually sick that day.
Right. Yeah, I guess we suspected there was shenanigans up there. We hadn't actually had it confirmed yet. It just is such a big coincidence that every thinking viewer is like, oh yeah, that's not a coincidence.
Yeah, but it's also the kind of thing, if it happened in real life, people would be divided on whether or not it was a coincidence, according to largely what they already thought of the presidential candidates.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what happens. Everyone is prone to conspiracies of one kind or another. The question is, what is the magnitude of the conspiracy and what draws you to it? Psychologists have actually done that study when they define conspiracy as anything you firmly believe without supporting evidence. And with that definition, everybody falls for one conspiracy or another. You know, for example, personally, I find it hard to believe that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide, despite all official word to the contrary.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think those were the key ones. I can't think of anything else that is going to be super relevant. So,
good.
All right. So from here, we just need to let people know how they can get in touch with us, which is of particular importance. Coming up, we do have a break coming up here, but we've had a feedback episode fairly recently. Our next one will not be in this coming break. This was as we said, this episode aired March 1st. The next episode won't air until April 26, 1995. So we won't do episode analyses in between those. We won't have a feedback episode in this break. We will have one in the next break. So we'll come back for 5 episodes, and then we will do feedback for everything that comes through or up to and including Season 2, Episode 18. So we'll get you to send your feedback in really the method of your choice. We've got 5 effective ways to pick from. One of them is by sending us an email to babylon530yearslater@gmail.com.
You can also leave comments at the website where the show is hosted. There are 2. The first one is johnreadscomics.com.
And the second is bureau42.com.
You can also leave a review at the podcatcher of your choice, which we'll then read on the air.
And the last place to go, we do have a YouTube channel where these podcasts are automatically posted through our host with a simple visualizer. You can leave comments there as well. So any of those would get to us. As we said, we are looking forward to feedback. Hopefully we've had some in our previous feedback episodes, because if all goes as planned, our next one will be our 5th. So I hope those have actually had some content to them. But yes, our next feedback episode will be coming up on June 21st. So we'll ask everyone to have their feedback in at least a week before that to make sure we have time to read it on the air.
In the meantime, what are we doing next week?
Well, next week, we are taking a little bit of a break. But the week after, we will be back to cover the first 4 issues of the DC comic book that ran for 11 issues, tying in with Babylon 5. And then we will come back another 2 weeks after that, or possibly 3 weeks by the looks of our schedule. That should have been a 3-week break. I had 2 weeks in our podcast schedule. That was my mistake. But yes, we'll be covering equally spaced between these two episodes, the first 4 issues of the comic and the first tie-in novel.
The comic series is already running parallel to the episodes that we are covering. So if you were watching this 30 years ago, you would have access to the comic. So we're going to be talking about the first 4 issues of that all together. And the first tie-in novel came out during this break. So we're going to talk about that. And yeah, it's one of those things that whenever I explore a franchise or property and I want to get really into it, I will do as much of the tie-in fiction as I can get my hands on. And so the idea of exploring the tie-in fiction of this was something I really wanted to do. Also because not the early ones, but the later novels are fully endorsed by JMS and considered part of his canon of the Babylon 5 saga. So seeing how some events wrapped up outside of the television series, I'm super eager to get to in 3 years.
Yes, we will get there, assuming we can both find all of the novels. So we've managed to track down most of them between the two of us, but we haven't quite found them all. So we will keep hunting and very, very hopefully cover every one of them.
For what it's worth, if you want to read the first one, it is available on archive.org, where if you sign up for an account, you can basically treat it like a library and check out a copy of Voices by Jon Bornholt. And you can have it checked out for an hour at a time as long as nobody else is accessing that particular copy at the same time. Which, because it's Voices by Jon Bornholt, Babylon 5 novel, not a lot of people are reading it at any particular point in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is useful. So, at least we say that. Who knows? Maybe suddenly all of our listeners will go right and try to check it out now.
Right now. Right now. Sorry, it's taken.
Okay, so that's our next 2, and then we will come back for 5 episodes. The first of which is the second and final episode written by Peter David. And also within that batch, we will have the last episode written by Larry DiTilio. So by the time we hit our next feedback episode, we will have covered 17 of the 18 episodes of the series not written by JMS.
And that cluster of episodes won't be the end of season 2 because once again, they waited until the beginning of season 3 to finish season 2. And I'm going to have problems with this again. We're going to talk about it again because P10, they made choices, Blaine.
Oh, they made choices.
But yeah, so break with tie-in fiction and then another segment of season 2.
And they also changed the broadcast date, or the official broadcast date of the episodes. So between the season finale of season 2 and the season premiere of season 3, that massive cliffhanger, people were waiting for less than 1 week.
Oh, they changed what weekday it was?
Yes. They went from Wednesdays to Mondays.
Wow. Okay.
So our podcast release dates will also shift from Saturdays to Thursdays at that time.
Because 30 years later.
Yep.
Alrighty.
Okay, so join us again in a few weeks here when we cover the first 4 issues of the comic, and thank you for listening.
And good eating to you.